I came across this story on Reddit a couple of days ago, and it really caught my attention, so I decided I'm gonna share it with you guys as well. But not just that, I don't even know where to get started with this one. Because this isn't just a crime story, this is an entire music scene that somehow turned into a genuine crime wave. There were things like church burnings, stabbings, murder, and at the center of it all, a group of young musicians in Norway who decided that being evil wasn't just an image, that they actually meant it and want to be here, or at least some of them did. And that is where this whole thing gets a lot interesting. So just a fair one in there. Now, let's dive into the rabbit hole, and I will take you back to the beginning real quick. Black metal as a genre didn't start in Norway. It actually traces back to a British band called Venom, and their 1982 album was literally called Black Metal. But in the early 1990s in Norway, that is where things went completely off the rails. And it all started with one band called Mayhem. Mayhem was formed in Oslo in the mid 1980s by a guitarist who went by the name Euronymous. His real name is Øystein Aarseth. I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing that right. I'm not good with name, guys. And just so you know, pretty much everyone in this story goes by a stage name. So I'm just gonna use those because honestly, the stage names are part of the whole thing. Mayhem was extreme, dark, and deliberately shocking. In 1988, they brought a new vocalist from Sweden named Per Jung Holland. I'm sorry, I am terrible with names, guys. I am very bad with names. But this goofball went by the name Dead. And Dead was not just a stage name. So Dead was, and I say this with all due respect, genuinely is disturbing in a way that went beyond performance. It did things like wearing black and white face paint to look like a corpse. It buried his stage clothes and dug them up to wear at concerts so they would smell like dirt and decay. He engaged in self-harm during performances. Also, he collected dead animals and kept them in a plastic bag so he could smell them before shows because he wanted to feel closer to death, which is unhingedly and crazily disturbing, like yikes, if I must say. Here is the thing about Dead. By all accounts, he was deeply depressed, and this wasn't just an act. He genuinely believed he was not fully alive, and he had written about wanting to die. So he is kind of suicidal. I don't even know why I'm using the word kinda. He is very suicidal because on the 8th of April 1991, Dead was found alone in the house the band shared. He had his wrist and his throat and shot himself in the head with a shotgun. He left a note that said, "Excuse all the blood," which is purely scary to think of. Like, he doesn't care whether he lives or dies. And I know that is all sad and all, and what Euronymous did next is where this whole story takes a dark turn. Before calling the police, Euronymous went to the shop, bought a camera, came back and photographed the body. He then reportedly collected fragments of Dead's skull and made them into necklaces, which he gave to musicians who he considered worthy to have them. What the fuck? That is literally, genuinely one of the most disturbing things I have ever came across, even though I tend to drown myself in, creepy crimes. Because this was his bandmate, his colleague, and his first instinct was to go buy a camera, photograph the body, and you know what? Downright some psycho ritual shit. According to what I know, one of these photographs was later used as the cover of a bootleg Mayhem live album. Euronymous used Dead's suicide to build Mayhem's reputation. He told people Dead killed himself because black metal had become too commercial and trendy, so he leaned into it fully. And by that, I really mean he leaned into the dark side of it. And somehow it worked. the suicide made the scene more notorious. More people became obsessed with it. I can't help but say that is kind of weird. So later in 1991, Euronymous opens a record shop in Oslo called Helvet, which means hell in Norwegian, obviously. The walls were painted black, decorated with medieval weapons and band posters. He also ran a record label from there called Death Like Silence Productions, and Helvet basically became the headquarters of Norwegian black metal scene. Musicians from bands like Emperor, Burzum, Thorns will all gather there. This group became known as the Black Circle or the Black Metal Inner Circle. Now, here is the thing about the Black Circle, right? Euronymous presented it to the media as this organized cult of militant Satanists with a coordinated agenda to spread evil and terror. But in reality, one of the members later said it was just, and I'm quoting this directly, just a name that was invented for people who hung around the shop. There wasn't anything like members and membership cards and official meetings. So basically, it was just a bunch of guys hanging out in a record shop basement who convinced Norwegian media they were Satanist terrorist organizations. Which, I mean, is kind of hilarious and funny until they started actually doing non-funny things. Because in 1992, the churches started burning. And on the 6th of June 1992, the Fantov State Church in Bergen was burned to the ground. This was a historical significant wooden church that was hundreds of years old. And that was just the beginning of their many atrocities. By 1996, there had been at least 50 church fires and attempted arsons across Norway. And in every single case that was solved, the people responsible were connected to the black metal scene. So now, it is a real terrorist empire. Just so you know, some of these churches were ancient historical landmarks that are now gone and burnt into ashes like oof. And on Christmas Day in 1992, a church was set on fire in Sarpsborg. A firefighter who was responding to the blaze unfortunately caught fire and died. This band of maniacs basically indirectly killed someone now. Craziness. And you want to know what's surprising about all of this? I actually still don't know why they are really doing this. Apart from the fact that they want to commit crimes and turn the world into a place where evil is the only thing that is welcomed. That is literally what I'm observing from this whole case right now. However, the main person behind the church burnings was a musician named Varg Vikernes, who ran a one-man band called Burzum. He was convicted of burning 3 churches and attempting to burn a 4th. He was also caught storing 150 kilograms of explosives. 150 fucking kilograms of fucking explosive. What the fuck, bro? You know, I always want people to at least have some sort of practical and real reason to commit crimes. Not that there should ever be a reason, but this is just absurd and ridiculous. So Varg Vikernes and Euronymous had allegedly even plotted to blow up the Nidaros Cathedral, one of Norway's most famous historical buildings. Fortunately though, that never happened. Now, the church burnings are unhinged enough on their own, but then there is the murder in Lillehammer. So, the drummer in Emperor, a band in the Black Circle, went by the name False. And in August 1992, False was walking home at night in Lillehammer when a man made a sexual advance towards him. False agreed to walk with him to the Olympic Park and then stabbed him 37 times. And then he kicked him in the head repeatedly while he was already on the fucking ground. Which I still don't know the reason why until Faust bandmate later said Faust had been fascinated by serial killers for a long time and wanted to know what it felt like to kill someone. Which is absolutely no reason. That makes no sense. Or does he not know that serial killers are basically lifeless and deranged monsters? Well, why am I asking that? Because Faust apparently felt no remorse. He confided in Euronymous and a few others. And then the next day, he went back to Oslo and helped burn down a chapel. He wasn't caught until over a year. He was then only arrested after the wider police investigation into the black metal scene kicked off following another murder. That murder. So, by early 1993, tensions between Euronymous and Verge Vikernes had been building for a while. There were disputes over money, over contracts, over who was really running the scene. Euronymous had also been making death threats to Vikernes and various other people, which apparently was just a normal Tuesday in the scene. On the night of the 10th of August 1993, Vikernes and another musician drove from Bergen to Oslo to Euronymous' apartment. Vikernes stabbed Euronymous 23 times, 2 wounds to the head, 5 to the neck, and 16 other to the back. Euronymous was 25 years old, and what happened to him was definitely very unhinged. Now, here is the ridiculous bit. Vikernes claims it was self-defense. He says he found out Euronymous was planning to tie him up, torture him, film it, and use it as an album cover. He says Euronymous attacked him first and he acted in self-defense, which, if you actually think about it, it does make sense to a level. There was some sort of proof from what happened to Dad. Unfortunately for Vikernes though, everyone thought it was just spitting a bunch of BS, so nobody really bought into that. The 16 stabbing to the back especially make the claim of self-defense argument very difficult for him. Vikernes was then arrested 9 days later. In May 1994, he was sentenced to 21 years in prison, and that is Norway's maximum sentence at the time, for the murder and the church arsons. And here is the detail that I genuinely cannot get over. The month that Vikernes was arrested, Mayhem released their debut album. I don't know how to pronounce it properly, but that is the name, De Mysteries Dom Santanas. An album that features Euronymous on guitar and Vikernes on bass, the murderer and the victim on the same record. And again, this was released right after the murder. This is a wild decision, but let me guess, it is some sort of money-hungry strategy, because it definitely will make people want to buy into it, in my opinion at least. But Euronymous' family asked the drummer to remove Vikernes' bass from the tracks. The drummer actually refused. He said that he thought it was appropriate that the murderer and the victim were on the same record, which again is kind of diabolical and pure torture to the parents. So after all of these atrocities and despicable things that have happened, what happened to Norwegian black metal? Well, it became one of Norway's most celebrated cultural exports. And I am serious, the National Library of Norway staged a major exhibition about it. They put it in the National Museum of Popular Music. Norwegian black metal bands have won major music awards and toured the world. The same scene that Norwegian media called Satanic Terrorized in 1993 is now basically considered national heritage. And Verge Vikernes, a convicted murderer and arsonist, a man who stored 150 kilograms of explosive, was released from prison in 2009. He has since become notorious for racist and very far-right views, which is a whole other thing entirely. Faust, the drummer, was released in 2003 after serving 9 years for stabbing a man 37 bloody times. What the fuck? Well, I am not the bloody government. And Mayhem, the band at the center of it all, actually still exists, well and alive, touring and still making music. Anyways, this one is pretty different from what I normally talk about on this channel. It is very, shall I say, strange and seems like a beautifully crafted doing. A music scene started with a bunch of teenagers, by the way, in a record shop basement in Oslo, somehow produced genuine terrorism, multiple murders, and still somehow became one of the most influential sound in modern metal, which just shows a lot about group mentality. You know what they say? If your friend is a loser, there is a high chance that you will eventually become a loser if you were never a loser. So all of them in one metal band basically had qualities of each other. And if you're really curious, what actually dropped my jaw while making this video is that the metal music was put in a museum. Make that make sense. Oh well, I'll stop yapping about this. That is pretty much it, guys. And if you really enjoyed this video, please ensure to like and subscribe to this channel for more, crime breakdowns and other mysterious things that I tend to talk about. And I will see you in the next video. Have a wonderful day.